So welcome to the Build and Thrive podcast. It's the next episode with me, your host for this one, Stuart Mace. I'm the Director of Workplace Health and Wellbeing for the organisation. And as you know, these podcasts are looking at putting the health back into safety, or as I seem to look at it, is making sure we're turning awareness into action, more so probably on the psychological and the mental health side of things as we move forward. Just before we meet our guests, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsor, GKR Scaffolding, for making this all possible and helping us out with these recordings. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul McGregor. So usual sort of beginning, Paul, please, can you tell me your full name?
Full name, I want to go for the middle name as well, Stu. Paul Robert McGregor.
Same as mine.
Is it really? I never knew that.
Yeah, after my dad. Although I have a confirmation name because my mum, being an Irish Roman Catholic, put me through the whole confirmation piece, mate. So I was proper indoctrinated. But yeah, my dad's Bob, Rob, or Dad. And what's your current occupation?
My current occupation is founder, CEO of Everymind at Work.
And I understand Everymind at Work have won an award recently, so I'm sure we'll come on to that. In fact, was it 2 awards or was it just the one?
We won the 1 award, but then one of our clients' dreams, the best store, won as well, which is great.
Quality, excellent. But yeah, well, I'll probably want to. I haven't spoken to you since then, so this was only last week, and we're recording late March. So yeah, I'll probably want to get into that a little bit later if that's all right with you. And what would your specialised subject be if you're on an episode of Mastermind and you're asked what you had to be quizzed on? What would your specialised subject be?
I'll give you 2. One's a little bit different than the other. I would say, I was thinking about this before we started recording. Anything to do with, I'd say Liverpool Football Club.
Oh dear.
Premier League era, Stu, because I'm not going to go further back. My mum would be good at those questions, but I wouldn't. And then randomly, lyrics to old school R&B music that I realised recently that if it comes on, I can remember the lyrics from all the way back when, but I can't remember what I had for dinner last night.
Yeah, okay. I'm more inclined to talk about the latter than the former, if that's all right with you. Although, as you know, a big football fan. But all right, so lyrics to old R. So how far are we going back, old R&B? Are we going, early noughties or...
Yeah, the Usher era, Chris Brown era, T-Pain, all of those.
Now, I saw you about, I don't know, was it a year ago or something along those lines? When actually I was on the receiving end, you were interviewing me. And you were going to an Usher concert that night with your daughter. So I get the feeling this daughter excuse was an excuse, and actually you were going for yourself.
No, my son was meant to come. I've got 3 sons, so no daughter. But I was going with my goddaughter. I was going with, and my wife and her mum and her husband. So it was a family affair going to watch Usher.
Right. Okay. I'm still not convinced, mate.
But we've tried a few. My eldest is really into Bruno Mars. He wanted tickets for that. We couldn't get tickets. We wanted to go see, I don't know if you remember, Akon, Neo. They're touring together.
Is it?
But everyone's going to watch them at the moment, so all the tickets are fully booked.
But the point you made there at the beginning, and actually been serious about it for a while, because actually my wife Jackie mentioned this just the other day, is that you haven't heard a song for literally decades or even more than that, and then it comes on and you know it and you hear it and the mind has almost got like a Rolodex. if people know what that is, I'm showing my age there, but it's just how it just remembers things from, let's say, 40 years ago, and you haven't heard, and it's just there, and you kind of like, how's that happened? And dare I say it, that might take us down a path of looking at things like therapy and things things like that, when you start to talk about what you remember from your childhood but still with you today, or actually why you are doing what we do or who we are because of what happened. I'm not sure how old you are, but from my perspective, what might have happened 3 or 4 centuries ago. About 3 or 4 decades ago, should I say? It's all a bit weird how you just remember lyrics. So what would be your best lyrics?
No, I was going to say that. Don't ask me to sing any lyrics.
I'll let you
Otherwise,
off.
we'll end the podcast straight away.
Yeah.
I'd say Usher Confessions album is probably the era that it would be on my Walkman. It would play over and over and over again, and it just gets stuck in there.
Yeah. I'm not a fan. I don't know his music, although I'll have to say I think it is him who does start one of their songs or finishes one of his songs. So there's 3 sides to every story: one side, the other side, and the truth. Is that him? Is that from his Confessions?
You're testing me now. I think so. It sounds like a Confessions album line.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I wasn't expecting that, but then on the other hand, as I say, I was aware that he did go to a gig whenever it was. But yeah, there you go. And when you did go to that gig, I was obviously doing a podcast where I was on the sofa with Peter Kelly, for those of you who know Peter, and you were interviewing me for your company, Everymind at Work. And as I said at the top of the show there, it's just won an award. So why don't you tell the listeners what you do? What's your elevator pitch? What does the organisation do? And give us a flavour of how you make a difference.
Yeah, awesome. The elevator pitch is always scary because it's really hard to get a complex problem down into a few sentences. But for context, our pure focus as an organization is we call it support for the supporters, and really what we discovered over the last few years of working with different businesses in different ways is majority of them had mental health first aiders that implemented it. Potentially a lot of them, especially the construction ones, had hundreds, but they all came to us with the same challenges of we have no data, we don't know what's going on, we feel that they're unsupported, it hasn't really been tailored to the workplace, and we're kind of left here scratching our heads on what to do next. So very much for the last few years, we've dedicated our time, our resource, our sort of investment into solving that problem. And we kind of call it the supporter method, which is our approach. It's a framework that makes peer support safe in the workplace, but it makes it effective, it makes it safe, and it makes it measurable. So we do that in a variety of different ways, but typically working with an organization across the whole year. And we support, different businesses in different industries. So, yeah.
And when you mention that support, what's it look like? I mean, are we looking at workshops, webinars? I know there's a platform, which again is something I'm interested in. As I say, how does that support look like? Well, what does that support look like, should I say?
Yeah, so a lot of our support is centered around the framework, which again we call the supporter method, which is 5 stages. The first stage is assess, which is very much about, for an organization that might have hundreds, what we do initially was, okay, well, let's reset it. Let's get a commitment from those hundreds. Let's ensure that we have the right people in place. But also let's, make sure that the commitment's there, but it's embedded into the organization. Typically what we find, and you'll know this, Stuart, is majority of businesses didn't do that. They just trained whoever raised their hand. So when you do that, you then end up with a bunch of challenges along the way. So we do that, then we do training. So we'll do initial sort of 1-day training course. We tailor it to every business, but we don't sell that training as standalone. It has to be the beginning of the journey with us. And that kind of kickstarts them, onboards them onto our platform. From there, we'll then do live sessions every month. We give them access to e-learning. It's very much to keep them capable, and we can track their learning and share that back with the organization to make sure that they're still confident. And it's not a let's train them and refresh them in 3 years' time, because that doesn't work. Support element, we have a one-to-one support team. So they provide sort of guidance and debrief. It's not counseling, it's not therapy. It's kind of there for the difficult conversation, safeguarding. And then engagement is, we basically engage the network for the business. So we keep the momentum alive, we keep them sort of ongoing, and then we kind of engage the wider organization, and then we measure it, which is our platform, as you say. It's very much anonymized conversation login, but then you can break that insight down into locations, sub-locations, what support do people need? And that really then gives you that visibility of the network and the conversations that people are then having.
Yeah. And what sort of numbers are we talking about, Paul, with regards to how, you mentioned there construction, some organizations have hundreds of mental health first aiders, and I don't see it as much nowadays, but certainly I would say 2 years ago, it was almost like a badge of honor. The more mental health first aiders you have, the better supposedly it was almost like demonstrating we care because we've put money into this. But so in terms of coming back to that piece, what sort of numbers are we talking about with regards to if an organisation was to look at jumping onto that software? Does it have to have a minimum amount, or can the software, obviously create the data and the themes just from a small number?
Yeah, well, our ethos is, to your point there, like quality over quantity. It's again,
Sure.
like, to give you an example relevant to sort of your audience as well, like Waits Construction, one of our probably biggest clients in the construction industry. They had 450 people trained in mental health first aid, but what they didn't have was what we highlighted here: the data, the impact, the visibility, and everything else. So what we did with them is we reset and relaunched a network of 60 individuals, so 60. But then you've got a higher quality group of people spread across the organization, logging conversations, giving them that insight. And then from there, we can then start to scale up and grow. So I think Waits are like 4,000, 4,500. Another example, KFC, again, massive business. We actually launched with 32. So we're not talking hundreds here, but our approach is, and maybe we undersell ourselves, our approach is get the structure, get the safety, get the support in place for a smaller group.
Yeah.
Once you can then measure it because you're getting the data, then expand out from there.
Yeah. I do think that piece is important. And funny enough, I'm a bit of a gas as to how many organisations don't, look at, recording or even knowing what they're exposing their mental health first aiders to. And, you and I have spoken about this at length on many occasions. And recently, obviously, starting with construction, health and wellbeing, for those who haven't seen me do it. But, I do a presentation which is titled "What They Don't Teach You in Mental Health First Aid Training," and a lot of it is around when you step back, I guess. I'm an advocate for mental health first training in society, and would I rather have a mental health first aider in my business than not? Yes, I would. But the point of the training is that it's fit for purpose for society, but realistically, is it fit for purpose for organisations? Because it's not really going to solve organisational issues. It can certainly help, and you can build that can be part of a wider structure. But it's once you bring in mental health first aid into a working environment, it is then subjected to health and safety at work law. Mm-hmm. And once you start to talk to people in health and safety, certainly in the construction industry, there is a lot of rigor around that, and there's an element of looking at risk mitigation. And there's a point in the presentation where I'm talking about what organisations should do or organisations shouldn't do, just in general, around psychosocial risk or what have you. And one of the points I make is we're not to knowingly put our employees in danger. And then actually question that around mental health first aiders. I then do a Slido or word cloud is, describe some of the foreseeable risks to our mental health first aiders. And every time I've done that, I've had, dozens of words. So it's demonstrating we know the foreseeable risks of our mental health first aiders. For organisations, very few organisations, obviously not the ones you're working with, but I'm seeing very few organisations do anything about that. So they're knowingly putting their employees in danger, which we know falls foul of a couple of health and safety at work laws. So I'm kind of still a bit like, wow, I can't believe that's been missed, certainly over the last, since it exploded after, I would suggest mental health first aid exploded after the pandemic or during the pandemic, shall we say. And in terms of that, have you seen many organisations coming to you, or you using that as I suppose, a lever to sort of say to organisations, hey, do you realise where you may be actually causing yourself more risk than necessary?
Yeah, a lot at the moment, because you're totally right. And again, I think some people see my posts on LinkedIn or whatever, and they think that I'm kind of bashing it as a whole kind of concept. Yeah. But I'm similar to you, Stuart. It's like, I always use the example, if I go through that 2-day training course and I'm out of a friend, I've now got some skills to potentially, start that conversation or spot some signs or whatever. But my friend doesn't see me as Paul, the mental health first aider that he can go to for a conversation. That's just skills that I now have in society and in the community. I think, to your point, and this is the point I always make, when it became a workplace initiative, we started to make people become a role. And we started to say to colleagues, go and speak to Stuart, he's a mental health first aider. And in my opinion, and it's quite clear as you agree, it's like when you start to do that, then you need to make sure there's rigor. You need to make sure there's formalities. I always use the example of, I'm passionate about this because, as you know, I lost my dad to suicide back in 2009. And, I was a year later, so I'd have been just 19, nearly 20. I went to become a Samaritan because you have that fire in your belly of like, I want to help more people. And I didn't make it past, stage one of the assessment process because that would have been so unsafe for them to put me on the phone speaking to someone in crisis. It would have been so unsafe for the person that was in crisis, and it would have been so unsafe for the Samaritan. So I always use that example in the workplace of, when, yes, more people need training about mental health. That's not what we're arguing about here.
Exactly.
More and more people go through training. The problem is when they become a nominated mental health first aider, a nominated champion, they need to have some more support and structure in place. So, we hear it a lot. I've had countless conversations with people where, mental health first aiders have been re-traumatized. They've been dramatically triggered because of their own experiences. Again, I think 95% of people that become mental health first aiders have lived experience. Again, so we need to be aware of that. I think it's just seeing it with a different lens. I think it grew arms and legs, as you say. Loads of people just went through the training. Loads of people set objectives of, we want 1 in 10 people trained. We want one person in every location. And then now the next question is, how do we make it safe? How do we make it effective? How do we make it measurable?
Yeah. And in terms of that and potentially trends that you're seeing in your data, I'm not asking you to give away any sort of trade secrets here, but are there any trends or themes that you can share that you're seeing, or organizations are seeing and then looking to hopefully tackle or support with?
Yeah, so we pulled some data recently. So again, across all the organizations we support, the supporters that we have on the platform, they will log the conversations anonymously. But again, businesses can customize that into their locations, their signposting, everything else. But some key insights that also, when you think about traditional mental health first aid and what I'm about to share with you, there's a massive disconnect. So one of the key insights that we have across, I think it's just almost 8,000 conversations that have been logged, is a third of all conversations. So the number one reason for a conversation being logged is work-related issues. So already you start to go, oh, hold on. We're spending 2 days learning about psychosis, bipolar, depression, anxiety, general mental health. But a third of conversations that are happening with these individuals is about what's going on in the workplace. Right? So already, and I know we've spoken about this, you have to start to look at, okay, is the training relevant to the workplace? Is it relevant to your industry? Is there scenarios and case studies? Are people thinking about, risk assessments? All of this stuff that's really key. Another key piece of sort of insight that we have from the data is, I think it's just under half of the conversations are chat only. So again, we're at a point where these individuals are having conversations, but they feel that they've contained that in an effective way, that they haven't had to signpost. So again, when we think about the concept of mental health first aid, it's have a conversation and signpost, have a conversation and signpost. But the reality of it is if it's just some workplace concerns, potentially someone's going through a little bit of a challenging time at the moment, like it doesn't always escalate into signposting. And then the third one, just to highlight as well, which I think is really key, because from a safety element, we're talking about it a lot more. And it just surprises me how many businesses don't even say this word internally. I think it's 2% of conversations logged in our platform are safeguarding concerns. So again, they have been identified that this was a conversation with someone to not harm. It's a safeguarding incident. We then ask them, have you reported it internally? So again, it seems like a really small percentage, but there's still hundreds there that, have been logged, and there could be even more that have gone unnoticed. So those are 3 sort of key themes from the data that we see.
And they don't surprise me. And coming back there, I'll say, not to sort of reiterate, but it's page 30 of your workbook that you get that has what influences your mental health and lists risks, and work isn't on that risk. And that's why I start my presentation with, and it's kind of sort of saying that, work is a part of life, and work is a determinant of health and well-being. So it is going to affect your mental health. But the last point you mentioned there as well, I think the percentage is probably higher within an organisation. It's just potentially not getting logged, or people don't feel safe that they can come forward and say what they need to say. And plenty of people have, I've said this before, but with one of the organisations I used to work with, we would look at monitoring or logging the calls or the conversations that the MHFAs were having, and it was 48% was work-related stress. And this is where why I sort of champion on about it. That's the area where I think I can help an organisation, or we can help organisations. It's if half of your mental health first aiders' time is taken up with somebody with a work-related issue, where would you rather be with that mental health first aider? Would you rather they know there's management standards on the HSC management standards, and have had an upskill on that, and suggest having or taking the person having that conversation, we're taking an individual stress risk assessment, or do you signpost them to the EAP? Yeah. So if you're going to do a signpost, if you are going to signpost, what's more valuable to the organisation? And possibly coming back to your point with regards to that upskill of, that supporter program. But that's kind of where I'd be looking for organisations to move, and that's obviously where we can help. Is the thought process is that if the tide rises, then all the boats rise. With regards to actually this becomes embedded and ingrained in organisations that pretty much most people running around the organisation, even senior leaders, are aware of those management standards, and we've got the tools and the processes to then start looking at the things that are actually causing the issues within work. And again, it's not rocket science. It's just actually following a logical path.
And it's funny because I was saying to someone the other day, it's like, obviously, and we briefly touched on this, like we all work with some companies where we'll be managing and we'll be dealing with their health and safety team because they'll be owning this. And then in a lot of others, it would be like HR.
Yeah.
And they both talk very different languages. Yeah. But what's really interesting is, like, if we use the language of HR, like there's a lot of people talking about culture, and there's a lot of people talking about culture transformation and employee engagement, employee experience, right? So if we think about that, what we need is people in the business that, as you say, are able to create that culture. Like, they are the heart of that culture. Yeah. So in the essence of like, I'll go and speak to an employee assistance program, it serves its purpose potentially for counseling and personal stuff. But when it comes to like what's going on in the organization, sure, it needs to be the people within it, the workplace systems and everything else. And then you look at that from a health and safety sort of element, it's very similar as well. So I think, and I reflected on this a lot last year, because for 10, 11 years, I've been really focused on raising awareness, getting people to talk about mental health. I always think if my dad could have talked earlier, if I could have talked earlier, then great. And you've seen that, like you've seen that message. It's okay not to be okay. Speak up about how you feel. But what I believe that's created, Stuart, is it's created this huge amount of awareness that I need to go and speak about how I feel. But what we're really lacking is the capabilities for people to be able to have those conversations. So, when I then go, it's okay not to be okay, I'm going to speak to a mental health first aider within my organization, but they're not able to deal with it because they don't feel confident or equipped. Then all of a sudden, like, that issue just doesn't get managed. If I go to my manager, it's the same thing. So I think you've done a lot of awareness, but the outcomes aren't changing, they're getting worse. We need to look at capability a lot more.
Yeah, and to your point, and again, this is a conversation I've had internally with our team, and yesterday as well, I was presenting at an event, Action in RVT, which is quite a good event. But anyway, the small talk and the conversations that I was having after, I did the presentation on what they don't teach you in mental health first aid. It wasn't down the legal side. It was more along the lines of, look, psychosocial risk hazards, and let's go and do 45,003, which was the general gist of it. But it was the conversations afterwards. And it was kind of like, you know, let's go and do a risk assessment. Okay, we do a risk assessment. Now, from a health and safety point of view, and those who are listening who are into health and safety, they'd be aware that a risk assessment, whether it's stress or not, is you identify the hazard, you then put controls in place, and you manage and monitor. You manage and monitor to ensure that those controls are working or not, as the case may be. But it seems that when it comes to a stress risk assessment, is there you go, fill out a survey. Oh, we can see that in controls or in relationships, if it's the HSE survey, there's a high risk. So we've got to ensure we give those people support. And it's kind of like, well, let's put something in place like mental health first aid, or let's get people to talk, so it's a psychological safe space and all this sort of stuff. But it's not a control, and the training isn't a control. So it's that what I call the task and finish piece that's important. It's actually then having that, that's where I think the capability needs to be, is we've got the data, we know there's the risk. So what are we doing about it, which is actually tackling root cause? And you've got to consult with your workforce. You've got to consult with the people who are exposed to those hazards and those risks, because they're the ones who are likely to have the primary interventions that you need to put in place that are reasonably practicable. And again, I can't understand why there's such a resistance or reluctance to do that. And I'm wondering if it is that, or is it a capability thing, which I can't see why it would be, because all you're simply looking to do is having conversations. Or is it just an ignorance thing that we don't realise that's what we have to do, although we've been doing risk assessments for the last 25 odd years? It just, I'm a bit lost as to where it could be a whole plethora of things, but that's where I kind of get a little bit baffled. And I suppose that can kind of lead me on to, what you see has been done well. If you in the industry or with some of your clients that might be outside of construction.
Yeah, again, like we're very fortunate that our offering is, to your point there, it's like not an off the shelf like simple solution. Like sometimes I wish it was from a founder perspective. But it's not, and that's the problem. It's like I always say to people that are really interested in bringing us in, I said, like, this is probably going to be the hardest part, being able to get the buy-in and being able to get people to champion it, because it's not an easy solution. I think to your point a minute ago, that's been the problem since COVID. It's been like people have looked for those quick fixes, those quick solutions, and it doesn't change anything. But yeah, we've got some incredible clients, like obviously Waits Construction, won't mind me talking about them. They, again, had a network of 450 people trained. And that was just because, as majority of construction businesses did, they got into a bit of a sort of habit of like, oh, we need more. But Kelly there, who we work with, has very sort of got to a point a lot earlier than a lot of people have, hold on, like they need support. We need to know who these are. We need some visibility of that. So as I say, we did a big exercise with them over sort of 18 months ago of like resetting that to a core group of 80 people now, 60, 80 people now. That have access to our platform and have that support. But alongside that, Waits it's not just that, they're doing a lot with managers, they're doing a lot with, all employees and really focusing on it from like a whole business perspective. I've been on sessions and panels with the family members, who sit at the top. I've also been on panel discussions with, group health and safety directors who have said and called out specifically, the whole industry needs changing. Again, we can put loads of stuff in place as a business, but we're still talking about long working hours and everything else within this industry. So they're like very, very good and doing a lot of incredible stuff. And other industries too, as I say, Dreams, the retail store, just won an award recently of sort of Champion Network of the Year. They do some amazing stuff. So they've got like that community, like just spending time with their champions. Like they still work in the bed stores and like that's their job, but they're just having an incredible impact that's visible across the business. And loads of others. As I say, we're very fortunate. The people that tend to work with us really care about it. Because we're not a tick box, so we don't really get any tick box clients.
Yeah. And from the commercial aspects then, what's the value in doing that? And that's an obvious question and no hanging fruit, but I'm kind of like, does it really matter to an, and I'm thinking about, when it comes down to the decision maker, and right, are we going to spend what needs to happen because people may see it as a nice to have, or we've spent enough on mental health, or dare I say that the first aiders, I'm not going to spend any more because it doesn't really prove to do anything. Our absenteeism hasn't gone down, or productivity hasn't gone up, whatever reason why organisations spent on that in the first place. So I guess the question I'm asking in a roundabout way there, Paul, is when you've been in these webinars or these networking groups or conversations with those who are right at the top of the table, what is it that you are seeing as to why they are doing what they're doing in a positive way? And have you been in that position where you've had to influence, or has it been the pennies dropped, or has it just been a personal thing to them that they think this is something that we need to do as an organisation?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think so. What we tend to see is like the person who leads the network automatically will see the value in us, because we did an exercise recently where we wrote down like all of the responsibilities of someone who would lead a mental health first aid network within an organization. And I think it was like, I'm not over exaggerating here, 3 or 4 pages, because again, like we're talking about regular check-ins of all of them, ongoing development, supporting them, engaging with them, and the list goes on. So automatically when we share our solution with like the lead of the network, they see the benefits in it, because they're like, well, Everymind will manage all of that and we'll get the data from it. The challenge is, as you say, is like persuading them's a lot easier. It's then persuading the people above to obviously embed us into the organization. So there's a couple of things that we tend to see. Like number one is like the investment that you've already spent. So again, there's different costs for mental health first aid, but let's say on average it was £200 per person that had been trained. So if you're looking at an organization of, I've got a calculator here, I'm not this good at maths, Stu. If 450 people have been trained at £200 per person, it's 90k in investment already, right? Give or take. And then the question that they're asking now, the lead is, okay, what evidence have we got? Where is that 90k gone? Exactly. And the problem is there isn't any. There's nothing. It's just, well, we've trained some people and we think they're having conversations, but we don't necessarily know. So that's key, because it's almost like, well, okay, you get to this like tipping point as well of, okay, what do we do with the initiative? Do we pull it all together, which comes with some big concerns, or do we invest in making it measurable? That's one of them. Another one is, like you talk about a lot, the reputational and risk angle. Again, if we as an organization, and this is grey, I'm not the expert here, but if we as an organization have trained these individuals and we've paid for their training, we've then put them on the intranet, we've put them on posters, we're signposting people to speak to them, and then someone discloses to them, speaks to them, and maybe they mishandle it, or maybe the mental health first aider themselves, gets re-traumatized and has to go off work. We're talking about duty of care there. So again, that can go into the realms of, a lot more of an investment, a lot more sort of cost than investing into a solution like ours. And then I would say one of the other sort of measures that a lot more businesses are now looking at and asking us questions around is obviously absenteeism. Again, like with I think the recent HSE stats, that it's now the number one reason for sort of, days off within the workplace. If we think about that from a financial perspective, if we can get a peer support network that is more workplace focused, intervening earlier, it's measurable and it's effective, then, we're confident that would chip away at that kind of number. So I think every business is different. Every business has different top level objectives. But I would say like it's getting our champions to talk in that language, which inevitably gets it embedded into the business.
Yeah. And I think you're onto, you're on something there when it comes to the language piece. And again, this is something that was brought up yesterday, and I've heard it plenty of times. But it's what's the organisation's narrative, or what's the I suppose the senior leadership team's narrative pain points, and how do you start to talk their their language with regards to how you can bring in, the threads or that they're important to keep people in work. And again, one of the things I used to do when I was at Skanska, and obviously doing my presentations here, is people have got to be in work for the work to be done. Mm-hmm. And you've got to, the quote, the statistic that was shared yesterday by the BOHS, and actually Kevin, I think he's the chairman. He's been on my boss's podcast, Jenny's podcast. Is that 15% of all labour costs is sickness. Is what the statistic he's come out with and what have you. So it comes back to the point where I used to say to project directors, or even when we're going for bids, you've got to add another 10% onto that from a costing point of view, because your staff aren't going to turn up or they're going to leave within that period of the contract. So let's kind of think of that, and beyond that, actually, you're probably going to have to add another 10% to ensure you're doing what you should be doing from a legal point of view, from not just from the safety aspect, but from the the health and welfare aspect of things. And you ask again. I've said this many a time. I haven't met a CEO or a financial director who can tell me how much sickness costs them in their organisation, and I know why, because it's on the P&L, and it'll just be under the wage bill. It's not broken out or broken down. That's the biggest, it's the fattest resource or line on a P&L is, it's your biggest asset or your biggest outgoing is salaries and people and everything that goes around it. And it's still beggars, again, I'm still baffled as to why, that hasn't been drilled down into a lot more, or if it has, why certain, industries don't really look at that, and certainly the construction industry look at that in more detail. Because it's just for me, it's just an easy win. It's again, it's not difficult. It just does make me, it just makes me wonder why we don't do that. And again, I think there's a bit of a denial in there, I suppose. And maybe they think it's not that easy to fix, when it probably, if they actually put their mind to it, it could be easier to fix than what they perceive it to be.
It's like, what I understand from sort of businesses and how they operate is everyone has their own, the company has their objectives, but every team has their objectives, every individual has their objectives. So to your point, it's like if we're speaking to someone in HR, a lot of them might not even know about ISO 45003. A lot of them might not even know about the risk, the risk element, but they'll be measured on culture, engagement, EMPS scores, etc. So it's like making them see it in that way. But I think, again, like as you say, and then businesses have optimized for profit, and actually if you optimize for people and you look at that and you break that down further and you understand it more, it's like the one thing I always say is that we're not creating these issues, we're just surfacing them to the top. So you can act on them earlier. Like, they've always existed. It's like we always say about safeguarding, it's like a very little businesses have internal processes of, if I identify harm within a colleague in a conversation, how do I escalate it, how is it managed, etc. And a lot of them will go, because we don't really want to deal with that. It's like, well, it's existing. It's already there. We're not creating harm. We're just being able to give you a more structured process so it can be managed a lot more effectively. So like, we're not, by the data and the insight that we're sharing, it's not that we're creating any issues, we're just surfacing them, which is what businesses need to start having.
And I've heard it, I'm sure you've probably heard this enough times. We don't want to go and open that can of worms, or that's going to open Pandora's box. And you're kind of like, well, it's there. It doesn't, just because you're not looking at it doesn't mean it's not happening, or is it going to go? And it's funny, it's going to go away.
I was just thinking as well. Sorry to interrupt, but I was just thinking, like, it's the first time I've ever thought of it this way. It's like, I wish I opened the can of worms with my dad. Do you know what I mean? I wish that I got him to talk earlier. I wish he shared what he felt. So to your point, like, getting people to talk about it's not a bad thing. It's more like people not talking about it and then getting to that place where then it becomes more serious, which is harder.
But it's not talking about it and not dealing with things, which it creates the issue and creates the problem. Kind of thing. So coming back to your point there around, and I don't really want to play off different departments against each other, but I've certainly seen in the same organisation, people thinking differently about the same thing. So much so that they're almost like poles apart, and you're kind of like, the working silos. And I understand how organisational structures work, obviously, and you're so fixated on this is what I have to do because these are the metrics, or this is going to keep me in a job, or what, it's kind of like this is what I need to deliver on. And when you start to look at actually what that does and the ripple effect, possibly negative or positive, it has on the organisation, and then when it surfaces over to another department, it is kind of interesting. And it's kind of like, and I don't really want to state this is going to be a general statement, and I'm not saying this happens in every certainly in construction, but I've seen it more in construction than I have in other industries, is that often HR and health, safety and wellbeing, or health and safety, are not talking to each other as they maybe should. And one's talking around health and safety and potentially risk mitigation, and the other one's actually talking around about benefit and what we're offering and how do we stay out of court with regards to what we should be and how best to treat our people. You've got occupational health kind of in the middle, trying to actually service and support both, and potentially being played off against each other. And you kind of like thinking, well, each of these departments have got their own agenda, but you're still working for the same organisation. It's still your workforce, and we should still be looking at the same laws that we're governed by to ensure that we thrive. And it's not. It's the organisational matrices, and sometimes infighting, or sort of I've got to look after my own sort of department, that are creating the problems, and the workforce is caught in between and betwixt, and don't know what to do. And I saw this massively in recruitment. Obviously, prior to this industry, this part of my career, I was working in recruitment, and the recruiting team would just get caught in the crossfire of egos, narcissism, looking out for each other. But the person who's the person who's the victim in it all is the person who's supposed to be producing the work that is going to make the organisation profitable. And it kind of it's an interesting one, because, as I say, I'm seeing part of the organisation saying, I don't want to touch this because God knows what, and then the other half of part of the organisation saying, problem here, we're not compliant, we're going to get ourselves into trouble, kind of thing. And they don't really, as I say, nothing actually happens. And it's that action it's that awareness into action that, again, I think a lot of organisations just realistically need a hand holding through that, and it's not actually that difficult if you take the right steps.
Yeah, again, it's like everyone's optimized for different purposes and different reasons, and in fact, if the organisation made everyone think about people first, then actually it might be different. It's like, yes, HR as a function have different objectives and different goals to health and safety and other teams, but if all of them were really bought into people first and looking at this in a different way, then you're all still working to that same agenda. I think I've always said this with HR. Typically, that's been where majority of our clients sort of sit, and even with people in HR, it's like the only people I've met in HR that we work with are very compassionate people that really want to make a difference. But sadly, they're now tasked with the well-being, the mental health, the everything for 4,000 people. And he's like, well, that's not possible. No. It's just not possible. Especially sitting in a budget of benefits, which is the first thing to go when stuff happens. So I think everyone needs to be bought into it. I think we're in a really we briefly touched on this. We're really in a really different and opportunistic, but like era of accountability of well-being and mental health and safety. And and as we've touched on, one era was dominated by physical health and safety and making sure that people were physically safe. The second era was optimized and, focused around HR and performance and productivity and policies. And now we're in this new era where it's like everyone's like, trying to see what do we do, but no one really knows who owns what and what systems we should be building. So I'm excited because I think we're moving into a better era where we're starting to ask these more nuanced but specific questions. But I think we're going to have to go for a real tricky, 2 years to try and get a little bit more ownership on it.
And I think we have a responsibility now to ensure we get it right for future generations as well. And again, with regards to age, and people have heard me say this before. When I was introduced to the workplace back in, I started to work in the mid-90s. The advice my father once gave me was leave your emotional baggage at the door, and literally say be a different person in work because it's professional. And I can't stand organisations using the term professional as an excuse or a reason to treat people badly. We are who we are, and yes, you can wear different hats and different guises and what have you. And yes, we will behave. We'll behave. We normally regress to the mean, to the norm, and we will behave like like people around us will. Like the herd. But we are different. We have different behaviours with regards to who's around. But as I say, you are that one person, and I do think when I look at Generation Z and some of my own research through my masters, and not that I'm a father, but looking at my nieces and nephews and how they see work, it's very different to how I see work, and I think we've got to appreciate it's different, and the world of work has changed. Technology has made that so. But also, there's a lot of purpose in work, from your work, and I think a lot of what our younger generation need purpose more from work than we've just got to pay our mortgage, because that's how it kind of used to be. So, the agile, forward-thinking organisations, I think, get it or are starting to get it and realise what we've got to do now is going to serve us well, in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think as well, like in an era where there's lots of money and investments and everything else, it's very easy to throw a lot of money at initiatives and, as you say, kind of like write articles about how great that you are for people. I think it's in these more challenging times where like things start to get really pulled back and things start to get a lot more tougher, where you start to realise the organisations that actually do care.
Yes.
As you say, it's still people first, no matter the redundancies we might need to make or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting time, but we're definitely better off than we were, 10 years ago. Let's just put it that way.
I agree. Conscious of time, and coming back to nice segue to, I suppose, the questions that I was looking to ask you, and that final question, which is, if you did have a magic wand, what would you change? How the industry approaches workplace wellbeing?
Well, that's a great question. I think it would be that. I think from the top, like just putting people first, and again, it's a lot easier in a business of my size, but there's a great book that I read and it can be expanded out to large organizations. I think Whole Foods is one of the examples. It's called Conscious Capitalism.
Yeah, good read.
Yeah, like I think it's again, it's optimizing your business not for shareholder profit, and actually, lots of other things that you can do as a business, and it was when I set up Everymind, I did think, should it be a charity? Should it be a community interest company? Should it be a limited company? And naturally people think that we're a charity because we do good work, but actually we're not, and we're a business. But I would say that we're a business that really cares, and I hope, our clients would say that. I hope that sort of my team would say that. But that is definitely a lot harder to manage the bigger you get. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think, as we've discussed here, if that's the message from the top, that does cascade down. I think if everyone's sort of optimizing for money and shareholder sort of gain, then that will naturally have a much bigger impact on everyone else. Something else I wish if I had a magic wand, it comes back to kind of what you shared. It's more that just people feel they can show up more authentically at work. I think people are naturally doing that a little bit more. I always use an example, especially when I used to deliver training to managers. I always used to share my story about my dad and say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how vulnerable am I to you?
Yeah.
And they would always say, like, you're 10, you're 10, you're 10. You just shared like a really, personal experience. I'd say I'm probably about a 3 today because I share that story every single day now. It's the job, right? But I used to then say to them, there's so much to me that I'm not going to share with any of you here today, because I don't feel like I need to, and I don't feel like I'm safe to do so, but I can still be more human without overexposing myself to everyone else. So I think that's another thing. We're starting to see that more from leaders, of them bringing a little bit more human into the workplace, and that can have a massive knock-on effect. But it just, I don't know, it still hurts my heart a little bit when I think about my dad and being an engineer and not feeling like you could talk to anyone at work. And then my 3 boys are getting older. And as you say, they're going into the workplace. I just hope it's a place where they feel they can be themselves and challenge and ask questions and be curious and not get shut down for that.
No, I think there will be. I think the millennials were the ones that paved the way, and now Gen Z are really going to sort of put their size, whatever. And work needs, loads of people heard me say this before, work needs to be good for us. We need to look at it from a societal point of view. And there is a lot of, it's always going to be crazier, whatever it is from a news point of view of the world that we live in, because it's to create this cortisol, adrenaline and dopamine, because that's what sells in a sense. And I think, work does need to be sort of stable with, for people and our younger generation, I think, are more self-aware, more attuned. They won't, and people call it woke, but they won't put up with the crap. And and to a degree, rightly so. And therefore,
I saw it. I saw it the other day, Stuart. As one of our companies, or an insurance company, I sat in a room. Someone quite senior had flew over from Switzerland. I'm sitting there with their network of champions, and there's a 21-year-old in there, graduate or 22s, early 20s. And asking like challenging questions to this senior person. And I look around the room and I'm feeling uncomfortable, and the older people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but just weren't faced. Would just ask these questions. What are you going to do about that?
Exactly.
And it was so refreshing to see.
Yeah. And I think, I again, an idea I had with one of the organizations I worked in is that reverse mentorship, from a point of view of, why don't we get our apprentices to mentor our SLT is literally the idea I put forward. And it's like, whoa, you got to be like, no. Why don't we kind of, because we've got to start, and we've got, multiple generations in the workforce now. People are retiring later, because they have to work later because, the government has sold the household silver and all this sort of stuff. Or, we don't have the skills further down the line. So we've got to keep people in work longer. And obviously you're getting, Gen Z in the workplace. But I think it will be a better, clearly, I think it will be, a better place. And my sort of colours to the mast, like you have yours, but our colours to the mast is risk mitigation from a psychosocial point of view. And if we can stop that, that's when we can start to look at how we can thrive and make work good for us. So, but listen, I'm going to wrap it up there. So thank you for your time. Before I do, actually, anything you'd like me to have asked, anything else you want to talk about that you think we should have spoken about today?
No, I think it's been a good conversation. I can't think of anything else to add. I think, as you've said, we've gone through a lot. But again, I think, as you say, it's concepts that feel complex, but they're actually simple. I think you just have to look at it in the same way that you and I do and start to put some small changes in place, and you'll start to see the impact for sure. But no, it's been a great discussion as always. I'm sure we could extend it another few hours. Sure, yeah. I'll leave you with one final question. This isn't going to be fair. I'm going to do it anyway. One word answer: yes or no. Successful season for Liverpool? No. Easy answer. Thanks for your time. Speak again soon. Cheers, Paul. Cheers, Stuart.